This program is brought to you by Pussy Magnets.
Put a midge on your friends with a pussy magnet.
Welcome, my lovely lumps. Or should I say lovely labs? I'm so thrilled to have you here in the Labia Lounge. We're going to yarn about all things sexuality, womanhood, relationships, intimacy, holistic health, and everything in between. Your legs. Ooh, can't help myself. Anyway, we're going to have vag loads of real chats with real people about real shit. So buckle up, you're about to receive the sex ed that you never had and have a bloody good laugh while you're at it. Before we dive in, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm recording this, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. It's an absolute privilege to be living and creating dope podcast content in Naarm, and I pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. Now, if you're ready, let's flap and do this. Oh my God, is there such thing as too many vagina jokes in the one intro? Whatever, it's my podcast. I'm leaving it in.
Don't panic, you're not broken. Your sex education was a piece of shit. Get your flaps out and pull up a couch. It's the Labia Lounge.
Hey gang, just before we jump into this episode, I wanted to offer you an opportunity to access my new mini course for free before I start charging for it in future. It's for people with vulvas and it's quick to complete. It's all about demystifying the female body and pleasure anatomy and getting some basic fundamentals to understand your body better. It's called Pussy Pleasure Secrets, Your Roadmap to Bedroom Bliss. You can grab it on the freebies page of my website or in the show notes. It's a great little free resource to kind of dip your toe in or act as a bit of a taster for my work. So if you've ever been curious about this sort of thing and you just don't know where to start, or you want a really quick, easy, accessible, non-threatening way to get the ball rolling and start working on this stuff, this is a great place to start. Hello, my darling labial lumps. How are you going today? I am back from a bit of a lurgy. I got knocked down by the flu for the last week, so I didn't release an episode last week, but I had a bumper epi that was like 2 hours long from the sex party, so I figured you guys would be chewing on that for a while anyway. Today I have a darling guest, Kiki Maree, who's an inclusive, trauma-informed sexologist and sex educator, specializing in female sexuality and intimate relationships. Kiki is known for her holistic and vastly knowledgeable approach to sex education, and she has a PGD in sexology, as well as being the director of the Yonilicious Academy, where she offers high-quality, internationally recognized, certified training in therapeutic yoni massage and somatic sex coaching. Kiki has been in the field of sexuality for almost a decade now, helping women and vulva havers feel at home in their bodies, understand their own unique pleasure profile, and to feel sovereign in their sexuality through her somatic-based approach to sexology and her sexological bodywork. So welcome, Kiki. I'm stoked to chat with you.
Yeah, thank you for that awesome intro. I'm like, where did you pull that from? That sounds amazing.
That's all you, babe. Yeah, it's like we were just saying off record, it's great to finally make your acquaintance officially, because I think we've both sort of known of one another and followed one another's work for a long time. And back when I was getting into yoni mapping, I think I discovered you in the early years of doing that, and you're one of the only people also, pretty committed to that line of work. Whereas nowadays I feel like there's so many of us doing yoni massage and variations of. But yeah, it's awesome to like have your glowing face right in front of me right now.
Yeah, so good to connect with you as well. I've been following you for quite some time, and yeah, really love your work, love the podcast. I'm so happy to be here.
Aw. So today's topic is, I don't even know how to encapsulate it. I don't know what I'll title this episode, but we're going to be chatting about the disgust response, and I suppose how that relates to sex and intimacy. Everything from, feeling self-disgust for our own genitals and that inhibiting the way that we engage in sex, to feeling grossed out or getting a disgust response arising to other people's genitals, or just to the kind of general sort of messiness of sex. all the way through to things like, we'll discuss if we've got time, the ick, quote unquote, the ick, this thing that I've been hearing about a lot over the last couple of years. It's sort of got a name now, where we just all of a sudden find ourselves really repulsed or repelled by a lover. And then maybe we'll touch on, how the disgust response is actually utilized in kink and BDSM spaces as something that can elicit turn on. So all of the different ways that the disgust response relates to sexuality and pleasure, we're going to touch on. But probably the biggest thing is, which I guess for me has been how I can relate to this topic the most, is like how to overcome a disgust response when we're involved in sex and we're getting a bit icky around like sensory things, just all of the sort of fluids and different things involved in sex can be a bit confronting, especially for people with sensory sensitivities. So I'd love to just launch in and hear, I guess, your personal experience with feeling disgust, whether that's for someone else's body, for your own body, or just, what experience have you had with this? Because I know it's something that you talk about a fair bit in your work and you help people navigate.
Yeah, thank you. I fortunately haven't really had a strong disgust response towards my own body fluids and like sexuality. However, with others, when making love with others, when intimate with others, I definitely navigate a fairly sensitive disgust response. And can feel quite overstimulated through lots of sensory input. And that can result in a pretty strong disgust response where it makes me, definitely shut down. The ick can come on pretty quickly. And my, desire for intimacy and sex just goes out the window. And I currently am with a beautiful lover who has sensory sensitivities as well. However, for them, it's more physical, a physical response to certain kinds of touch and sensory overload in that way. So for myself, it's around sense, certain sense of other people's bodies, fluids at certain stages during intimacy, and not visually I don't have any kind of disgust response there. But then with my partner, they can get really overstimulated and feel that disgust response come through with light touch. And so it's been really profound. We've been intimate for 5 years now. We've found different ways to navigate that with one another and also with other lovers when we've been open, when we navigate the open relating space. And definitely as a sex educator, as a very sex positive person, I went through a journey of shame around it, of confusion, of, why? Like, I love sex. I love being intimate with people. I should want to do X, Y, and Z at the drop of a hat, shouldn't I? And really put those expectations on myself that I get upset that other people have put on me for being in the sexuality realm, or that people put on one another. And so I really love talking about it because A, it normalizes it, and B, I also understand it. The more I talk about it, the more I get an understanding. And I really love knowing that sharing my experience and my deep dive into this realm of the disgust response can really help people to make peace with their own disgust response, understand it better, and navigate it, and also find ways around it, because we're such marvelous creative creatures where we can really, get creative with what we have and how we can move through it and move past it.
So beautiful. That's fascinating. And it's such a classic thing where you working in this industry, of course, are confronted with these challenges and this. I mean, I've experienced different sort of flavors of imposter syndrome at different points of my journey as well, being like, oh my God, like as if I'm battling with this thing or, but I think it just makes us so much better at what we do and so much more empathetic and compassionate with the people that we're helping. And it's really cool that you and your partner have discussed responses coming up for quite different things. So, because I wouldn't have even come to think of it once you mentioned touch. Like I wouldn't have thought, because I just love touch so much, pretty much all kinds of touch. I don't necessarily get that skin crawling kind of disgust response from receiving touch from someone that I love and that it is consensual. But now that you've mentioned that, a lot of clients of mine have sort of talked about that feeling of just really sort of recoiling at their partner's touch or at certain kinds of touch. And then I'm like, oh, actually, I'd forgotten. But, 15 years ago, I definitely experienced that sort of like repulsion and like I just wanted to crawl out of my skin. So it's interesting, like the different ways that we can respond with that disgust or revulsion. And I'm curious as to what other kinds of things you see or you commonly kind of hear through your work that might repel people or trigger a disgust response. Because for me, like, the really obvious ones, scent. So like smell, I'm incredibly sensitive to smell. That's probably the biggest one that'll just really flip a switch and I'll just be like, ugh. But, certain fluids and stuff can be a little bit confronting at times. I've kind of overcome that a little bit more. But I also heard from a client recently, they had a partner that really struggles to perform oral sex on her because of like the texture, the sort of slimy, oystery texture. And he has really strong kind of sensitivities around that sensory experience. So what are some other things that people come up against that trigger their disgust response when it comes to sex or intimacy?
Yeah, those are some really great examples. The things that sort of come to mind also are the feeling of like one's own pussy. So feeling there's that uncomfortability you mentioned of going down on somebody else, but some people can feel that as well. So it can really create a barrier to any kind of self-touch or self-pleasure from feeling the slipperiness of our nectar, and or there can even sometimes be a little bit of a phobia there around internal touch, external touch, and so that can play into the disgust response as well. Period sex, that can be a really tricky one for a lot of people. Even just feeling if somebody's, free bleeding, wearing period undies, feeling the sensation of any kind of blood, any kind of stickiness up against the vulva, from even the dampness in the period pad, that can really trigger some of these sensitivities in some people. Definitely anal play, like that can be a really tricky one for a lot of people. And, a lot of it can be, I guess it's important to chat about the disgust response, where it's coming from, why we have it. And, some of it's biological. We're trying to keep ourselves safe. It is, a protective mechanism. And then some of it is our own social conditioning. So, the different things that we've learned and picked up along the way. And then the other, I guess, element of it is personal experience. So for somebody who has had a lover who had BV, and they sort of pushed through any uncomfortability they had around the scent, then going into lovemaking either with the same person once the BV is gone or with other people, they can create sort of an extra sensitivity to it, or an extra strong aversion or fear of, because of their own personal experience. Or for myself, when it comes to rimming, I had a lover who was really into rimming. It was also one of the only ways that he could come. And so I sort of pushed through some uncomfortability there to the point where I do now have an aversion to rimming. And so, I've found ways around that, pulling out the dental dam or having some yummy like flavored lube to make it more inviting and enjoyable. So, yeah, I think all of these sort of factors, that these three factors of cultural, personal experience, and biological, they're all valid. And I think really it's really important to acknowledge whatever they might be, that they're real, that they are a more visceral sensory experience, and that they're not just a psychological experience. Because I know some people approach it as like, oh, well, like, why do you think you feel that way? And you sort of try and break it down theoretically and analyze it, and then, go into how it might be because of feeling like you want to be in control. And this could be a part of it because of past triggers or wanting to control the environment to feel safe, which are also a part of it. But I do think it's really important to acknowledge that these are real experiences and we can accommodate them as well as work through them.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, when I was sort of looking into this topic, like I hit on some research around the behavioral immune system, which like helps people avoid like contamination or like disease. So it elicits that really strong urge to like avoid or escape or repel stimuli that, is linked to like a higher risk. And like sexual activity obviously presents a pretty big challenge for the behavioral immune system. It's got a whole lot of exchange of fluids. We're also, you're increasing the likelihood of like sexually transmitted infections, but also like, you're involving all of these orifices of the body. So like the mouth, the anus, the vagina. These are like really kind of delicate places where like things can get in, like different, bacteria or whatever. So it makes a lot of sense that there's already an inbuilt kind of disgust response to protect us from, contaminants and whatever. And then it's also interesting because maybe because of that being there, there's also this function that happens when you're really turned on that quietens down the disgust response, right? It's like if you're really, really turned on, sometimes that can sort of not switch off fully, but like diminish the disgust response so that you can engage in all of these like, quote unquote disgusting behaviors or like get really up close and personal with, some body fluids and some buttholes and some period blood. And so it's super interesting because like on one hand, the disgust response can really diminish turn on and can like prevent us from being aroused. And then on the other hand, in some instances, being turned on can diminish the disgust response. And it's really like individual, like what the triggers are, what the stimuli are, and what that sort of like balance of sensitivity are, right? And I guess like, where am I going with this? I guess I would just love you to, sort of talk on what, well, you sort of already did. You sort of talked a little bit about like what contributes to each individual's like unique balance of like, tolerance to, quote unquote disgusting things that trigger the disgust response, versus like I guess what's hitting their accelerator and making them like really turned on. That was a bit of a schmozzle, but do you have anything to add to that? Wasn't even a question.
Yeah, no, I loved everything you just shared. And that's so true. Like when it comes to our inhibitory response and our sexually excitatory response, these are so malleable or fluid, and we can do things that can, we can influence them.
Hey, baby babes. Sorry to interrupt. I just had to pop my head into the lounge here and mention another virtual lounge that I'd love you to get around. It's the Labia Lounge Facebook group that I've created for listeners of the poddy to mingle in. There you'll find extra bits and bobs like freebies, behind the scenes, or discounts for offerings from guests who have been interviewed on the podcast. There'll also be hopefully, inspiring, thought provoking conversations and support from a community of labial legends like yourself. My vision for this is that it becomes a really supportive, educational, and hilarious resource for you to have more access to me and a safe space to ask questions you can't ask anywhere else. So head over to the links in the show notes or look up the Labia Lounge group in Facebook, and I'll see you in there. And now, back to the episode.
And I think bringing mindfulness and acknowledgement to, okay, what is this? Where is it coming from? How can I move through it? Arousal is a huge one. Whenever we are aroused, we are essentially, depending on how aroused we are, in an altered state of consciousness. Our inhibitions are definitely reduced. And our sort of sensitive breaks of our arousal are less sensitive. And so we can come into contact with things that would normally be like, oh, get away from me, of like, oh, like I'm going to eat it up. And that's so magical and so cool as well to see that we can play with it. It isn't like we are trapped or stuck in our disgust responses, but that doesn't mean we don't, we dismiss them and dismiss others and be like, yeah, just get horny, you'll be fine. But instead, we can accommodate for them. I'm thinking of, for myself, I'm definitely, when I do rimming with my partner, I'm definitely not just diving into their asshole. Like, that's not my thing. It is the thing for a lot of people, not for me. So instead, I'm going to wait until I'm super juicy and it's enjoyable for me, because I never want to push past it again, because that's just going to create a stronger aversion and build on that disgust response. So instead, creating a positive experience around it, a positive association, and wait until I'm like, fucking come here, like I'm ready for you now. And we can do that with everything. And it's a way that we can help to desensitize ourselves and still do the things that we might want to do. Like, I'm thinking now, for example, I can be a little bit sensitive around semen sometimes, not all the time, because usually I'm quite aroused when it's around me. But I remember once I woke up to Jesse rubbing their pre-cum on my lips, my husband, and I was like, we had only just gotten together and we were super kinky at the time. Like, we were just like going wild when in the beginning of our relationship. So I woke up and I was like, my immediate reaction was like, like, what the fuck? But then I was like, that is so hot that they just like did that to me. And suddenly I was into it. So I think like a big piece is being able to be flexible and kinkify things and use our mind positively. So like, get on board, because I know for myself, I can get a little bit obsessive with my thoughts, especially around things that don't feel clean. And instead of like feeding those thoughts of like, oh, yuck, like thinking about the food in the teeth or like a little bit of spit on the mouth, like all those things where my mind can go there and just like have a play date with all of the things that it thinks is gross. But instead start focusing on like, oh, that was fucking hot. Like, and then like start thinking about Jesse's abs and how imagining them just like bending over and like doing that to me, like focusing the energy and attention on the things that I know are hot, that turn me on, that really helped. That being said, now, if they did it now, I'd probably be like, fuck off. Because we're 5 years in and I don't really like morning sex. So we've kind of got a boundary around that. But yeah, like I definitely have, it's been really great being able to use the mind and also working with clients to help them to focus more in on the things that light them up, that feel good, and try to not feed those other thoughts of the things that are giving them the ick. And however, I think it's also really important, because I've done this in the past where I've used my mind and ignored my needs, because I've been like, oh, just make it kinky. I'll just make it kinky. But then at the same time, I feel like I sort of went too far, and then suddenly I was doing something I didn't actually like doing. The novelty wore off, but this had become like the new norm. So as with everything, like going in with intention, lots of communication around it, and being just really true to yourself. Like, do you actually even need to do this? Like, do you need to have pre-cum rubbed on your lips? maybe not, maybe instead you would like some like delicious liquid chocolate rubbed on your lips instead, and do that in a really sexy way. Like there are endless possibilities in the bedroom or in wherever we have sex, where we can get creative and have fun and enjoy each other and engage our senses in a way that feels good for us.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, I like what you said also about being careful. I mean, being able to be intentional and use kind of conscious strategies to get on board, but also not push yourself too far or too often, because it is really, the potential that could be damaging is pretty high for certain people. And I definitely like developed aversions to things pretty early on by doing stuff that I wasn't into or wasn't comfortable with. And then it took a lot longer to undo that aversion than it took to develop it. So yeah, I think like pushing through and kind of just trying to give yourself some DIY sexy immersion therapy isn't always the answer. But at the same time, we can kind of push our edges and experiment with different ways or different angles to kind of approach it with, or ways to think of it. But yeah, I'm also like, when you were talking about, can't remember what you were talking about now. I've got flu brain still, but I was going to mention something relevant that happens a lot and people describe a lot with this kind of disgust response kicking in after orgasm or after ejaculation, because while they're like, especially with porn, I think a lot of people describe it when they're watching porn and they might be watching something quite intense or a little bit more out there than they normally would find hot, but because they're really aroused, they're like, oh my God, I just want more intensity, let's go. And then as soon as they come, they kind of feel this like repulsion, and they just kind of go, ooh. And it can happen post sex as well, where there's like a little bit of like a kickback of like the disgust response latently kicking in once all of the sort of sex hormones have flushed through and done their thing. Yeah. So, and that's something to kind of just be aware of. Like, it's a very natural response, and it doesn't necessarily mean, that you are repelled by your partner or anything like that. What are your thoughts? I always wonder how the fuck people even have sex when they're, I guess, like real germaphobes, like really sensitive to things like that. And I guess what a follow on from that question, or like a part two of this question, is like, do you find that neurodivergence or things like OCD or different sort of neurospicy brains find the sensory aspect or the germy aspect more difficult?
Yeah, 100%. Neurodivergent people that I work with and have played with, there are definitely some more. I mean, yeah, many of us, whether neurodivergent or not, have these sensitivities and can get the ick. And we have this, as we sort of mentioned, the biological inbuilt disgust response to keep us safe. But for neurodivergent peeps, the sensory overload can definitely come on much quicker, much stronger. And yeah, I think I've seen a lot of I guess benefit from working with an occupational therapy to get sort of a sensory profile, to just like understand it and then navigate it and work through it. Because I think, yeah, without being able to name it, we're really good at making ourselves wrong and blaming ourselves. And yeah, it's we've all got these little quirks and differences in our sexuality, but when it comes to neurodivergence, I think it can even feel more alienating when those sensitivities are stronger, or and finding lovers that don't feel that way. It can feel like you're made wrong or bad, or oh, here I am different again, I'm having to mask again or push through it. So,
Yes.
yeah, I think conversations like this are super important to
Mm.
normalize these feelings and, yeah, just to show that being human is just like it's a part of being human. We can't
Oh,
just be
totally.
ready to go and have sex all the time, regardless of where we sit in the neurospicy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. And I think it's really like it's pedestalized and it's glorified to be one of those like super horny DTF at all times kind of people that are just want to dive in and get amongst it and like don't give a fuck about any sort of
Uh-huh.
smells or, you know, like a lot of people find it a real turn on to smell like more pungent body odor or like pussy juice or
Yep.
whatever. Um, and I think like that's really like portrayed to be the preferable kind of way, like, you know, way to be sexually.
Mhm.
So I often like felt like, oh God, what's wrong with me? Like I'm so sensitive to smell and I'm like so easily grossed out by genitals. Like I've told this story on the podcast so many times, but you know, even with regards to my own body, I like when I first touched myself, I used Glad wrap around my fingers so that I didn't have to touch my vulva directly because of that, you know, disgust around the sensory aspect of it. And also just the shame and the conditioning that says, you know, genitals are gross and dirty. And it, you know, I didn't suck my first dick until I was like in my 20s because I was so repulsed and terrified to even go near one. And I had a lot of stuff that you know, was not all around the disgust response or sensory stuff, but that was intersecting with a whole bunch of shame and conditioning and trauma as well, which made a big old clusterfuck, which is what got me into this work in the first place. But it's so heartbreaking that you know we often have such revulsion around our own bodies and our own fluids. And a lot of clients that I work with, like, really, really, you know, are very hesitant to touch their vulvas and especially to put fingers inside their vagina. Um, but yeah, something that just popped into my head as you were speaking is I had a client who you know, described having a partner that, and she wouldn't mind me sharing this anonymously, but yeah, she had a partner that was very averse to the kind of lingus because of the sort of sensory stuff. And she was like, oh, like all of my friends are like, oh, fuck him. If he's not going to go down on you, then like dump him. That's not good enough. Like, what a selfish lover, blah, blah, blah. You know, which sometimes, you know, in that sort of Andrew Tate sector of like men, I'm sure, you know, there are men that are just selfish lovers and don't respect or give a fuck about women's pleasure enough that they will go down on you because for whatever reason they think it's like, you know, it's a power thing. But in this case, like, you know, I was just like, oh, like, sounds like, you know, he has some sensory sensitivity. And she was like, oh my God. She was so relieved that I'd sort of normalized it and understood it. And instead of leaping to the conclusion that he was just a bad guy and a selfish lover and she should dump him, which is what she'd been hearing from every other angle, she was really relieved because, like, I think she expected me as like a sex expert to also be like, oh, that's not on, you know, he needs to just do it, otherwise it's not equal. And I think, yeah, it was very validating for her to hear that, like, there can be so many reasons why people might struggle with that, and it doesn't mean that, you know, necessarily that he doesn't love her or find her sexy or whatever. But then I guess you kind of get to the question of like, okay, so, you know, what can we do about this and how do we navigate this together? Say if you are someone that loves receiving oral sex and your partner doesn't like doing it, or in my case, back in the day, I could never receive it. I just felt so much disgust about it and so much self-consciousness about my body that no matter how many lovers were like reassuring me and telling me that they love it and it's not gross to them and they were turned on by it, I couldn't let them do it because it was so gross to me. And thankfully I've overcome that. But yeah, in those instances when one partner has a really strong disgust response, and the other doesn't, and it's quite important to them to be able to overcome it or at least navigate it in a way that's sort of satisfies them both. Like, what is the general approach that you take to start nutting this out with people?
Yeah. I really love everything you just shared, and how the sort of glorification of like being down to fuck whenever and wherever is, it's so interesting, because I do feel like a lot of the time when I meet some people like that, it can be like quite performative, or they're really like disconnected from their body. But then there are some people that are just like, yeah, ready to go. But I think one of the really beautiful things that we can do for a lover is like really honoring their sensitivity, and yeah, like so they can feel really truly seen and safe. I think that is one of the most important aspects of any sort of sexual opportunity or problem that comes up, is to really sit with the reality of what's being presented, what is alive in that moment, and to approach it with curiosity and, you know, whether it be a disgust response, whether it be erectile disappointment, whether it be, you know, a low desire, just being, you know, in that heart consciousness with one another of, okay, like this is where we're at right now. What do we want to do from here? And there are so many things, as I was mentioning before, but I think that's kind of the first thing that I like to do with people that are navigating this or other sort of issues in their sexuality. And then, yeah, finding ways to approach each individual circumstance. You know, some people might be open to exploring with other people, you know. Some people might be open to working with someone like you or I and an occupational therapist, and working through the sensory issues, or at least understanding them deeper. And then other things that I've done, you know, are bringing in different toys. So like fleshlights are amazing. So are there are like little vibratory tools that you can pop on the head of a penis. Our hands don't have eyes or noses or taste buds, so they can go in and do lots of fun things with enough lubrication and confidence. So that's another thing that actually I was going to mention is with the light touch, you know, we're sort of talking about with smells and tastes, how that's very much like protecting us from bacteria and pathogens and things like that. But when it comes to soft touch, it's also a protective mechanism of like soft touch can often mean, you know, there's a bug on us, a spider, you know, something that we need to swat away.
Totally.
Yeah, and also it can be unconfident touch, and that can be really triggering for some people, particularly I feel with like any kind of vulva vaginal touch, and that can really make somebody feel unsafe. And again, so sort of that protection of like, oh, that soft touch doesn't feel like I'm being held right now. And so, yeah, finding different ways to cultivate that confidence, explore each other's bodies, map each other's bodies out with different tools, different types of touch. Again, with curiosity, I love taking people through the pre-sensate and sensate exercises, the contemporary sex therapy sort of approach, where we dial it right back. We start with eye gazing, then we go into hugging, then we go into sort of gently tracing on one another's bodies, to non-arousing touch, avoiding the genitals, then to arousing touch, then to frottage, or just what depending, you know, what the sexes are that are working together, whether it's male, female, male, and yeah, just sort of that approach is very much sort of rewiring the nervous system to create safety and to learn what that means with a partner, whether that is with a new partner or with a partner in a new way. And that can be really beneficial because we can start to see not only what each other likes and then capitalize on that, but we can also start to like get curious about what we don't like and why, and see if that's something that we can work with and work through. And then bringing in different tools and props and things to facilitate that. So yeah, usually around when we start doing, we do our touch, non-erotic, non-arousing touch and avoiding the genitals. Then we'll bring in some creams and some oils, and then we'll bring in some different materials and things like that. And there's just so much that can come through just from doing these quite like gentle exercises. We tend to take sex off the table and sort of put it, penetrative sex off the table, put it aside for a while, and then explore from this space of curiosity, kind of with a clean slate. And yeah, and usually, in that process, just even in the beginning, things start to shift, and the presence and awareness can really settle and ease some of those fears or responses that are coming through. Because we have the amygdala that's getting activated with the disgust response. It's kind of like, or even with the ick, it's like, oh, this isn't good, get out. Or, our mirror neurons are picking up on our partner's discomfort or lack of confidence. Or we have, I think the insular cortex, which is like responsible for the disgust response, that's just saying like, no, like this isn't for me. This isn't good. I need to get out. And so when we're approaching intimacy from this very like relaxed, sort of parasympathetic, slow, curious, open state, all of those systems that usually sort of get fired and activated and triggered by the way that we have always done things, that can kind of have a pause, and there's space for exploration and like discovery of new ways of being intimate with one another.
Yeah, gorgeous. Awesome. I love that. And I want to dive even deeper into this in a minute, but I just realized we haven't even done the segment Get Pregnant and Die.
Don't have sex, because you will get pregnant and die. Don't have sex in the missionary position. Don't have sex standing up. Just don't do it. Promise?
So would you be so kind as to share a sex ed anecdote from your life? Can be something funny, can be something sad, can be how sex ed failed you, or maybe some amazing sex ed you received. But anything that springs to mind around your sex ed journey.
I like that. Okay, the first thing that comes to mind is just so cute. I remember when I was young, I think I was like 12 or 13, and there was like talk of blowjobs in the classroom. I think maybe like someone was getting shamed for doing it or something along those lines. It probably wasn't loving, I would say. That classroom was full of shitheads. And anyway, I remember just being like, blowjob. Like, I knew it was to do with the penis. I picked up that much, but then I was like, okay, so you put the penis in and then you blow? Like,
that's what I thought.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's like air go in the hole? Does it blow up like a balloon? Like, what? Why? That sounds, I was like, like, is that kind of like raspberry blow? Like, what is that? So yeah, that's
I love that. I mean, obviously that would be your first thought as like a little innocent young thing that hears that. Like, why is it even called that?
right. So
I mean, I know. On that, I have definitely, I think I have a very like strong sense of play. And when it comes to sex and bodies, it's like there's endless things that you can do that are kind of inventive or playful or funny or just a bit experimental. And so I don't know if you've ever done this, but I've like kind of blown up a foreskin a little bit. So it's almost like a bit of a blown up balloon, just a little, and then sort of pinched the foreskin and like let the air out in like a little beep.
I've never done that.
Um,
I haven't had enough foreskin sex.
yeah.
How
Yeah, I
fun.
mean, it's you can do all sorts of stuff with a foreskin, so it's pretty funny to just like experiment. I think we were even like trying to record the audio of what it sounded like to release air from a blown up foreskin.
Ah!
Um, I know, and I got the idea from this is pretty raw dog. This just shows the kind of friends that I used to hang out with. Which I love, so creative. But I don't know if you know like about nangs. Um, what's another word? Nangs are like what is it? It's like laughing gas, and people
Oh,
they have these little canisters
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that you whip cream with or whatever, and they inhale it, and
Uh-huh.
it like fucking deprives your brain of oxygen and gives you some sort of psychedelic
Uh-huh.
experience. So people in like certain scenes, might do them at festivals or parties. It's
Yeah.
never been my thing, but basically you have like a Nang canister which you release the fuck, I wish I remembered the chemical. It's like and anyway, it's a gas, and yeah, this guy like put like a friend of mine that I was in a band with once years ago like put the Nang gas up like in his foreskin, and it ballooned into a little balloon, and then one of the other guys like put his mouth over the foreskin and like sucked in the gas from
Oh.
did like a wang nang is what they called it. Um
That's
And there was
awesome.
like a video of this Wang Nang, and he blew it up quite big. I was like, far out,
Whoa.
that's a whopper foreskin. You can get a fair bit
Wow.
of Nang gas in there. Anyway, I digress. So,
That's awesome. I have filled up a foreskin with water before.
oh,
Definitely done.
that's great. Yeah,
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 that was mm-hmm.
yeah. An ex of mine whose last name, he's been on the podcast a bunch. I think we've even maybe talked about this, but his last name is Sabatini, and he has 3 brothers. They're the Sabatinis. And he had this move, which I think actually, now that I've talked to more men, a fair few of them have discovered and done themselves. He called it the Sabatini pinch and release. And when they would be like camping or at a festival or like, not able to shower regularly, when he would go for a wee, he would kind of pinch the foreskin shut and wee for like a little bit at the start to like fill up the foreskin with wee and flush around, the kind of coronal ridge, and just in case there was like smegma. His like theory was that like the wee would sort of like flush it all out, and then he would like let it balloon up and then like release it, and the piss would sort of So I remember he showed me that in the shower one time, and I was like, what the fuck? Penises are wild. Like
That's so awesome. Ah.
Yeah, cool. So, anyway, back to the disgust response. Speaking of fluids and penises and smegma, um, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on like what is the ick? Like, what drives that? Is it like, and can you overcome it, or is it just pushing shit uphill to try to like how Because I don't know, is it? I mean, I'm quite sensitive to pheromones. It sucks when I'm really into someone, but
Yeah.
I just don't like their smell, and
Mm.
then that becomes stronger and stronger and stronger until I can't even be around them because I'm so grossed out, and I feel awful because they're a legend, but
Mhm.
I just can't do it. And so the ick is often driven by smell for me, but also like I feel like on an energetic level, I can get a disgust response from any sort of like neediness, or if I feel pressure from them, like if I feel like there's expectations to have sex, or there's this pressure and they're trying to like take from me, and a little bit of like, if we're on the wrong side of the kind of wheel of consent too often, where I'm feeling like they're using me sexually for their own gratification and it's a little bit one-sided,
Mhm.
or if they're like way more into me than I'm into them, and there's this kind of anxious neediness, I can feel
Mhm.
repelled by that and feel a little bit avoidant. So there's all sorts of things that can like give me the ick. Like, what's your understanding of it?
Excuse this quick interruption. I'm shamelessly seeking reviews and 5-star ratings for the potty because, as I'm sure you've noticed by now, it's pretty fab, and the more people who get to hear it, the more people I can help with it. Reviews and ratings actually do make a big difference to this little independent podcaster. And it's really easy to just quickly show your support by taking that simple act of either leaving 5 stars for the show on Spotify, or even better, writing a written review and leaving 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts. Or if you're a real overachiever, you can do them both. That would be mad. If you're writing a review, though, just be sure to use G-rated words, because despite the fact that this is a podcast about sexuality, words like sex can be censored and your review won't make it through the gates. Lame. Anyway, I would personally recommend doing that right now while you remember, just to get on top of it and let me know you're with me on this journey. Thanks, gang. Enjoy the rest of the epi.
Yeah. So I think it's very much connected to a similar neurological response as a disgust response, like the amygdala, the mirror neurons, like all of those things where we're picking up these different responses to the stimuli. And I think you sort of mentioned one of the things that I attribute some of the ick to, which is definitely the avoidance of someone who's feeling a little bit too clingy or a little bit too attached. Like it can play into our attachment styles. So there might be even a bit of projection there to create distance. Also, I think societally we can be very much influenced by what gives us the ick. So someone seeming needy societally has oftentimes been shamed or seen as not cool or not attractive. And so
Not confident.
exactly. And so, subconsciously we can pick up on that. And, if we don't talk it out, especially, it can just kind of fester. And then we get that negative bias, so that wherever we see just a little bit of it, maybe it could have been fine before we got the ick, but then we see it just a tiny bit and we're like, oh, no, go away. And so that sort of negative bias tends to amplify those negative responses that we're getting from it. And yeah, again, I think that it's important to acknowledge it, not necessarily with the person, but just acknowledge it within yourself and then to unpack it. I do think it's possible to get past it. Jesse and I, my husband of 3 years, and we've been together for 5. So, I've definitely gotten past it. But our first date, I friend zoned them so hard because I got the ick strongly, really strongly. Yeah. We had the worst first kiss I've ever had in my life. They knew it, and they were asked for another one because they were I'm never going to see this bitch again. She's that sucked. That was shit. I want to get one more kiss from her. And I was okay, really? Why do you want another kiss? That's what I was thinking. And then, and then we hung out more and I got to know them more. And, I was obsessed with them pretty quickly, but there were some societal things that I was struggling with to begin with that were giving me the ick. Definitely there was the confidence thing, a little bit. And so I definitely obviously feel like you can come back from it. And I have talked to other people, other clients, other friends who have started out as friends and then it's turned into something more, and whereas they would never have thought they could have been intimate with that person. Or even were disgusted or repulsed by certain people, and then that connection and attraction can be built. And I think a lot of that is due to just actually understanding the projections falling away, understanding who the person is in front of us, and getting to know them. That being said, I don't think it can happen all of the time. It's a very case-by-case scenario. I've personally definitely gotten the ick and have never been able to go back. And I don't know if that was just because I was lazy, if it was because it didn't feel worth it to me, there's so many different factors and variables there. Maybe in another circumstance I could have. But yeah, again, I think it's really important to acknowledge it within ourselves and then see if it's someone that's worth connecting with more, maybe addressing certain things that might need to change. For example, hey, when you touch me like this, I really like it, and sort of guide them, away from a touch that might be not confident, or I really love making sure like everyone's nice and clean before we're intimate, or, I'm really sensitive to smells. So I love it when like there's some essential oils diffusing, when my lover's wearing something yummy that I love to smell. And yeah, like if the person's worth it, finding if there are ways to calm down that sort of amygdala, like get the fuck out kind of response, and just, and also I think being aware of our negative bias, that, okay, cool, like I'm noticing that now because I noticed this before. Is this actually a problem? And, a lot of the time we can easily believe our thoughts and just assume just because we feel, and our feelings, because we feel a certain way, then that must mean X, and getting curious around our responses and icks, seeing, are they coming from conditioning? Are they coming from our past? Is this something that is like, I'm going to allow to dictate my life and this circumstance, or is it something that I can like work with and just recognize like, oh, okay, cool, I'm having that thought now. Where is that coming from? And yeah, it might be genuine. This person might be like not your cup of tea, and that's also okay. But yeah, I think, from my experience, very successful experience of definitely winding back that ick, I think it's, especially in our culture now where it's very much like swipe left, swipe right. There's so many people out there like just like fucking, that's the word I was looking for. I think it's worth like really sitting with. And we are also being so much more influenced externally, globally than we have ever been before. So what thoughts are mine, what feelings are mine, and and honoring those.
Totally. Yeah, I think I've heard so many times when people have a first kiss with someone or they have sex with them for the first time and it's not good, they're like, nah, like that's how I can tell, like that's a write-off, done. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like when the fuck are we ever good first time around at any new skill? Every person you make out with is a new person and basically like a whole new kind of terrain to learn to navigate together. And you have to allow a bit of grace to like calibrate, and you can 100% like train / teach / guide someone to kiss you the way that you like being kissed, and you can kind of meet in the middle, and it takes a bit of practice. So I love that you mentioned that the first kiss was shocking, because so often I feel like that's where people leave it and they're just like, oh, well that's never going to work. And I'm like, yeah, I've had boyfriends that have wound up being my boyfriends that the first kiss was pretty atrocious. And, it just takes a little bit of, and that's the thing, it's like some people are very hesitant to communicate at all about sex or about intimacy. So, for them, they probably just leave it there and try to find someone that magically knows exactly how they like to be touched and kissed from the get-go. But that's so difficult and it's so rare, and it's way fucking easier and more rewarding if you just put on your fucking big girl pants and communicate and try to like gently, tactfully guide them to touching you or kissing you in a way that's like more aligned with how you enjoy being touched and kissed. And it's totally possible. It's so possible to like mold people a little bit, and naturally they kind of come and meet you in the middle eventually. Like, yeah. So I'm so curious, like what was so bad about the kiss?
Yeah. It's like an energy thing. Like I'm a pretty like high, like my erotic blueprint, like energetics are pretty high up there. So I just wasn't feeling the feeling that I tend to feel attracted towards when making out with somebody. The kiss itself, like, it wasn't anything like fucking tongue going down my throat instantly or like smelly breath or anything like that. Like it wasn't it wasn't like that. It was more of an energy thing. I was like, what's going on here? Like and I mean, we unpacked it and figured it out later on because I was curious, because I was obsessed with them. Like I thought they were an amazing person. But and also sort of to add to what you were saying about, you know, those times where it does just work, you know, it's like, oh, wow, the kiss was amazing. The sex was amazing. Sexuality is so, as we know, like so fluid. And that doesn't mean it's going to be like that forever. So whether or not you establish that like great communication from the get and like get what you want in the beginning and make that like your norm, or later something traumatic happens in our life, or there's like a birth or a death or pregnancy or just menopause or a change in our desires, this shit's going to come up, you know, it comes up for us as sex educators. It's going to come up for most of the public. So if, you think like nailing it the first time is going to be like smooth sailing forever, like that's not always the case. And
Oh God,
so,
no.
you know, and so it's like, getting these skills and like working on communicating around sexuality and like just getting what you want, whatever that is, like, and you know, the more people learn about their sexuality as well, like that's a huge piece. Some people feel like they like their sex life and then they learn about their sexuality and then they're like, actually, that wasn't even what I wanted. And however, that's the kind of sex you've been having with this partner for 3 years because that seemed like what you wanted then, and then you're going to have those conversations afterwards. So
absolutely.
it's going to come up, you know, and it's just, it doesn't matter if it's in the beginning. In fact, I think it's better.
Yeah, I think like the skills that are the most important to cultivate aren't sex skills or technique skills or any of that. It's like the skills that are required to navigate things as they come up. And like, you know, having great sex and chemistry in the beginning often masks the underlying incompatibilities and means that people like dive in and think, oh my God, this is so incredible, and they get their judgment clouded. And then when that sort of dies away, they're in these relationships that, you know, aren't, and they haven't really had to practice communication skills or how to navigate differences or discrepancies, because in the beginning it was all so easy and effortless. So I think like, you know, if anything, if it doesn't start out all peachy and smooth sailing, but you stick with it because there's enough reason to do so and there's enough kind of care and compatibility and interest and attraction in other areas, that can often turn out to be like the strongest, most kind of sustainable type of relationship, because you've already been practicing these skills of like, okay, how do we navigate a discrepancy in desire or things that we like or ways that we kiss or touch or how we want to have sex and how we want to communicate about that. Like it's there's so much to navigate in any relationship, especially when there's sex involved. So you know, getting across that is so important. And yeah, like on that, it kind of leads me to the last little thing I wanted to touch upon, which is like the BDSM and kink space and how that intersects with like the disgust response, because you know, there's, from my experience, just really, really high levels, a lot higher than just regular old vanilla relating, of communication in the kink space. Like there just has to be really, really great communication and more communication for that to all operate safely and stuff. So I feel like they do a pretty good job of utilizing the disgust response or things that would normally be considered disgusting as a way to feel more turned on because of the taboo nature of it. Do you have any kind of examples of how, like, disgust can actually be a kink or be a turn on in that realm?
100%. Yeah. So that's Jessie, like my partner. They are super into smells. Like they'll also just like smell like the most random things before every single thing that they eat. They smell it first. So they're really connected like in that way. And there isn't really anything that has grossed them out. In fact, it like I remember once when I had BV and I was feeling a little bit like self-conscious about it. And we're making love and we're in a hammock tent, so very confined space. There was a lot of scent in the air and they were just loving it. They were just like, like smelling and like fucking me and just like in heaven. I was just like,
whoa,
okay, cool. Like there goes my like cream around my baby.
How good. Oh my God.
Yeah, 100%. And then I've had clients that are like, yeah, I love, like they'll get I can't remember what it's called, but it's like a chair with like a face hole, and then they'll just get people to, like, really sweaty play partners, lovers, to like sit in the chair, and they'll just like put their face in their ass, like lay under the chair and like get all up in it, and just like a gas mask, even like breathing it in. So yeah, like there's the other end of the spectrum where some people are like that, the more the merrier, you know.
Yeah.
Which is so cool to see that that's what is possible for some people, you know. It's there's a broad spectrum. And I definitely feel like I've leaned into different aspects of that for myself, and also when working with clients, of like, hey, like, so this is a possibility. There's a spectrum here. Like, are you able to borrow from any other experiences with these different sensitivities that and people can get like playful and like, oh, okay, like that's kind of fun, or they're just like, fuck no way, like never, and that's also fine. But like what you were saying with the communication piece with kink, it's when in the kink world, we are like all about consent. We are all about not yucking another person's yum. And so all of this stuff gets like super normalized really quickly. And it's so fine if you're like, yeah, I do not want like a single drop of semen on me, you know, like, and that's okay, you know, and that might be cool. You're gonna wear a full body latex suit, and I'm gonna, you know, ejaculate all over that. Or they might be like, yeah, I want to like drink all of your cum, and that's, you know, that it's all welcome. And sort of to tie it in also to like other aspects of sexuality that people can feel really sensitive about, or there's the tabooness. Like I'm sort of thinking about like a medical, what's it called? Jesse used to be super into it, like medical play. And they said there
like
was somebody,
urethral sounding and
yeah,
injections and things like
that
that?
kind
Or?
of stuff, like all of like the needles and things being really clean, and like cleaning somebody, for example, like that was like a kink for them. And yeah, they had somebody in their kink community that had herpes, genital herpes. And so it was so cool for them that they were like, yeah, like whenever there was an outbreak, they were like, we're going to treat this like with like care and tenderness, and this is exciting, and I get to look after you. We have to make sure we're like super careful to not transmit anything. And so that's something that can be like really scary for some people, and being intimate with somebody that has some kind of transmissible disease, like an STD, or an STI, then instead, it can be changed and kinkified. Like essentially anything can be kinkified. But yeah, particularly talking about these different things where humans can be a little bit like, oh, like, you know, that protection piece coming in. And I think also with period sex, like some people are super into period sex, like they prefer it, they want to like eat you out when bleeding, but then yeah, like that sort of the other side of that is the protection piece. And I sort of wanted to tie in the menstrual cycle is that you know, we can feel so differently during our cycle. And so while we might be like, yeah, at the beginning of a relationship, super down for anything because we're flooded with neurotransmitters, neurochemicals, hormones, and we're like, you know, our inhibitions are very much lowered. And then, you know, life's with those drugs, those love drugs start leaving our system, life kind of takes over, the stresses come back in, and yeah, we can have sort of created this sort of foundation that might not be realistic moving forward in our sexuality. Perhaps maybe when we ovulate, we might feel that way spontaneously, but a lot of the time, yeah, there are things we're going to need to communicate that we actually prefer during different parts of our cycle. And so for some people, period sex might be amazing and they might get like super horny during that time. They're going to need to communicate that and explore ways around that. depending on their partner and how down they are, or in the premenstrual phase. Like for me, I hate making out in the premenstrual phase. So yeah, I cannot like really like the just thoughts of like dirty teeth and like tongues are just I'm just like, ugh, like no, like my disgust response is quite sensitive during that phase unless I'm aroused. Whereas the rest of the time I'm like, but that, you know, and that took time to understand that and to be able to communicate that. And I think people who cycle really, it's really important for us to be able to feel comfortable to communicate these differences and different needs during different phases of our cycle.
Hey, me again. If you'd like to support the potty and you've already given it 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on, I want to mention that you can buy some really dope merch from the website and get yourself a Labia Lounge tote, tee, togs. Yep, you heard that right. I even have Labia Lounge bathers. Or a cute fanny pack if that'd blow your hair back. So if fashion isn't your passion, though, you can donate to my Buy Me a Coffee donation page, which is actually called Buy Me a Soy Chai Latte, because I'll be the first to admit I'm a bit of a Melbourne cafe tosser like that. And yes, that is my coffee order. You can do a once-off donation or an ongoing membership and sponsor me for as little as 3 fat ones a month. And I also offer one-on-one coaching and online courses that'll help you level up your sex life and relationship with yourself and others in a really big way. So every bit helps because it ain't cheap to put out a sweet podcast into the world every week out of my own pocket. So I will be undyingly grateful if you support me and my biz financially in any of these ways. And if you like, I'll even give you a mental BJ with my mind from the lounge itself. Saucy. And I'll pop the links in the show notes. Thank you. Later. Totally. I love that you mentioned that because it is, you know, sometimes it's like we feel like practically a different person, like at different points of our cycle. And if we're not recognizing that we have higher sensitivity at a certain point and we're pushing through, and, you know, in your case, maybe you're just forcing yourself to make out and do just as much of that sort of intimate stuff in your premenstrual phase as the rest of the time, you might be just then doing damage to your sort of, conditioning yourself to create this aversion. So if you're really kind of sort of attuned to the different needs at the different stages of your cycle and how to communicate this and honor those needs, you know, ideally that will mean we're not kind of creating aversions where they don't need to be created. But so often we are expected to just function and behave and respond exactly the same every single day. And so because of those expectations, a lot of people, you know, who might not feel like having sex at their period or beforehand or not feel like doing particular kinds of touch will kind of just push through and do it anyway because it's like, oh, well, I do it all the rest of the time. And so now within my relationship, that is just expected as like blanket consent to do that whenever. And because we're kind of gritting our teeth and pushing through and allowing it, we may then form an aversion which will hinder our, you know, desire at other stages of our cycle. So it's great that you mentioned that this is such a fluid, fluctuating thing, and it's really important to keep an eye on that and like honor that at any point and communicate our needs as they change, so that they are allowed to kind of change and fluctuate and we can roll with that, as opposed to trying to like force ourselves into, you know, the same box day in, day out, with like negative kind of ramifications of that. Yeah, that's really cool. I would love to get a TMI story from you just before we wrap up. I feel like we've done a pretty like comprehensive job of covering like a lot of the, I guess, aspects and elements around the disgust response. And I guess takeaway was really, you know, communicating and like getting creative and curious about how to navigate it on a case-by-case basis, because I suppose there's so many different ways that people can experience a disgust response. And so their needs are going to be different. There's no like one size fits all around how to navigate that. But takeaway being that usually there are ways to navigate it and potentially overcome or at least work with these aversions or disgust responses. And so you can add anything you like to that just before we sort of sign off. But in the meantime, do you just have a quick TMI story for me?
Yeah, definitely. So Did you say you wanted me to add on to what you
Well,
just said?
feel free to add on to that now and then we'll do a TMI.
Yeah. Cool.
I'm all
Yeah.
over the place today. Oh my
No,
God.
it's okay.
Fucking hell.
Yeah, I guess to add to that, I really love that. Like, it's very subjective, so you're going to have to do your own work on what
Mm.
your sensitivities are, why, and how you can work through it. 100%. I do find it like helpful sometimes to share just a couple of ideas of
Mm.
um, ways to work through it, and I think too then that can help people to go, okay, cool. Like, it might look different than what I expected, or yeah, I can really think outside the box here. So a couple of things that are my go-tos with the scents is just being super mindful of like communicating, hey, like I love it when you smell all like soapy after a shower. So let's like do that before we play. I would feel so much better if we do that before we play with each other.
Mm.
Um, and then having flavored lube has been a really good one. I've noticed that help a lot of people when going down on somebody, like finding a good quality flavored lube. Or coconut oil. Coconut oil can also kind of like mask the scent a little bit, or blend with the scent and smell yummy for some people. Otherwise, a dental dam, like for rimming or even going down on someone, dental dam can feel less. A less of disgust response there, even though it's like kind of like rubbery, latexy smell or taste. At least it feels like cleaner or safer
Clean.
for some
Yeah.
people. It's like soothing that safety piece. Um, and yeah, like, and just those few things there, it sort of shows you that it's okay. It's normal. It's fine to bring in a dental dam. It's fine to bring in some flavored lube or even some honey. I've done that before. Honey on the penis, honey on the pussy. And it's like, yum, like that's delicious. As that's fine to do that. You're allowed to do that. You don't have to push through it. And then, finding other things that feel like they're going to support you and just be like, cool, I'm going to add this in. And then if you feel like you need help, seek help, find somebody who are, like sensory friendly, understand those needs, whether it be a sex coach, a therapist, or an occupational therapist that can like really help you work through your own unique specific needs and journey, and they can make suggestions and you can try them out and experiment.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. I love that. What, like, really quickly, like, what would you suggest for people where the disgust response is coming from, picking up energetically that their partner or their lover is like really lacking confidence and that touch is really like hesitant and not confident? Because how do you force confidence,
Yeah, I've actually worked with this with a few different clients, and I feel one of the things that can be really sexy, and what I've noticed is like either that the person who's like lacking confidence to do some work on themselves, or whatever that might be. It might be like going to there's in the Gold Coast in Australia, there was, I don't know if he's doing it anymore, a dude who was teaching kind of like what's it called? Magic, like the magic mic moves, or like Chippendale, like that like kind of like embodying. Yeah, it's like encouragement of embodying those like lover seductive archetypes. If we're talking about a male-bodied lover. If it's a female-bodied lover, then they can go to a pole dancing class or like a sexy heels class where they're like feeling confident in their inner seductress, in their inner sensualist, and then bringing that into the bedroom. I really think the contemporary sex therapy exercises help with confidence because you start so basic and it's a very honest experience, so that the feedback you're getting from your partner when you do that experiments is genuine. And so when you know what works, then you feel confident in doing it. You don't feel like, oh fuck, they're faking it, because it's all about not doing that. That's really helpful. Also, going into the environment of the person who's uncomfortable and seeing them in that space, or the person who seems unconfident, sorry. So, if somebody's like, if they work in woodworking, or they work with cars, or they are a gardener, or whatever work place they do or passion that they have, the surfer, going into their environment where maybe you're not as confident. So then there's that kind of like power dynamic shift where the person who doesn't feel confident in the bedroom is feeling more confident in their space, and then spending time with them in that space, making love with them in that space. That can be a really nice thing, energetic to play with. Yeah, those are sort of the things that I've seen work and are fun to experiment with for sure.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I'll, do a little short massage course or watch some YouTube tutorials or something.
Yes, yeah,
Practice
100%.
touch
Yes.
skills. Beautiful. All right, my love. Well, I'm conscious of time, so do you have a TMI story that you can leave us with?
TMI, we love it. TMI, we love it.
That I haven't shared already.
Yeah.
TMI. Well, I'll just go with like the most recent one that I realized it was TMI once I'd already said it. I was sitting with a bunch of yoni massage students, and they were going through their the in-person training, and we were chatting about, sometimes when you do a yoni viewing circle, there's toilet paper in the yoni and it's kind of funny and everyone pulls it out. And I was like, yeah, like I eat mine. And they were like, what? Like, it's yummy. Yeah,
The little toilet paper vag boogers that you get.
exactly. Yeah.
You eat that. That's
Yes.
amazing.
Yeah, well, I eat my yoni juices all the time. And so it's like concentrated, soaked in, absorbed, like a little bread
Yeah.
at the end of the, so.
Crouton in soupy. Oh my God, babe, that was such a good one. And that actually reminds me, I wanted to say as a bit of a strategy, if you are sort of battling with self-disgust, which I struggled with around my own vulva,
Mm.
tasting your pussy juice is such a great strategy to just go, oh, actually that's nowhere near as gross as I expected. And it's helped me get over my kind of self-consciousness and stuff around it, was to dip a finger in and have a little taste and be like, oh, okay, it's actually just quite neutral, quite lemony. There's nothing too obnoxious about that. And so it helped me realize it wasn't so gross for someone else going down on me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a friend of mine, in that vein, a friend of mine loves playing with her period blood clots. She'll catch them in her hand when she's sitting on the toilet and a clot comes out. And she even said to me once, she's like, oh God, this gross thing just happened, but kind of not even ashamed. And I had a really massive clot just drop into the toilet before I could catch it. And I was so devo. So I just reached into the toilet and grabbed it out and had a little play with it and squished it in my fingers. And because she just loves playing with her period clots.
Yes.
And I was like, great, that is seriously, that's one way to get up close and personal with your body and remove some of the kind of fear and the disgust.
100%.
Anyway.
And I would sort of, encourage anyone who's listening to this now just to notice, when we're talking about these body things that humans do that are just kind of whatever, we're just animals, how are you feeling? How are you feeling when you hear that? And just notice oh, is that me? Am I actually in danger? Is this, do I need to be so protective of myself right now? How much of this is coming through from what I've been told is gross and, shamed for having a period, shamed for, I remember hearing kids on the schoolyard, talking about fishy pussies and how much of that is just been me told that I'm gross just for having a pussy.
Exactly.
And how much of it is actually real.
Yeah.
And sit with that, and I love that. I'm the same with the clots. I'm so excited. I'm like, oh wow, look at that one. But I'm also I wish I didn't have them. But yeah, I think, sitting with the disgust, being with it and just noticing what does that feel like in my body? oh, how can I like move through that? What am I making that mean? And get curious about it, because I feel like this is a really good opportunity to do that, because what we just shared might have grossed some people out.
Totally. That might be an edge, definitely, for a lot of people. But, is it yours, or are you is that disgust response being informed by your conditioning and our
Mhm.
society? A lot of the time that's for me, that was mostly what it was.
Mm.
So yeah, I love that you mentioned that, and that's such a beautiful note to leave things on.
Mm.
Thank you so much, my darling.
My
I'll put
pleasure.
all of the links to your work in the show notes, but is there anything you want to plug, or one last
Mm.
little thing you want to mention around
Um,
your work?
I do have a self yoni massage workshop coming up as a little plug, because I just love it and I'm so obsessed with it, and I think that it's such a great tool for people to do. It's pretty accessible and affordable. It's online.
Right.
But yeah, apart from that, I mainly focus on my students, with the yoni massage students and the sex coaching students. So if anyone has questions about that, feel free to reach out. I can give you a little Labia Lounge discount.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, and yeah, I hope that this has reached your hearts and your pussies and and wherever else on your body you needed it, and that it's created a little bit more normalization around just being a human.
Yeah, I love it. Beautiful. All right, my dear, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
And that's it, darling hearts. Thanks for stopping by the Labia Lounge. Your bum groove in the couch will be right where you left it, just waiting for you to sink back in for some more double L action next time. If you'd be a dear and subscribe, share this episode, or leave a review on iTunes, then you can pat yourself on the snatch, because that's a downright act of sex-positive feminist activism, and you'd be supporting my vision to educate, empower, demystify, and destigmatize with this here podcast. I'm also always open to feedback, topic ideas that you'd love to hear covered, questions or guest suggestions, so feel free to get in touch via my website or over on Insta. You can also send me in TMI stories to be shared anonymously on the pod. My handle is FreyaGraf_the Labia Lounge, if my account hasn't been deleted for being too sex positive, which, is always a possibility with censorship. But just in case the chronic censorship finally does obliterate my social channels, I'd highly recommend going and joining my mailing list and snagging yourself some fun freebies for the trouble at www.freyagraf.com/freebies. Anyway, later, labial legends. See you next time.